Understanding Shakespeare. Have you ever imagined going back to London around the year 1600 and going to the Globe Theatre to see one of William Shakespeare's plays? Would we have been able to understand it? We all know that there are some odd words in Shakespeare's plays that are no longer in use. There are words that have changed their meanings. There are some odd and inconsistent spellings. But even apart from this, I think we would have considerable difficulty understanding the actors, much as we might have difficulty even today understanding some of the very broad regional English accents in, say, Cornwall, Yorkshire or Newcastle, not to mention a broad Scottish accent. One of the reasons for this is what is known as the Great Vowel Shift, that's vowel with a V, that took place from the 1400s through to the 1600s. The pronunciation of long vowels in particular changed, along with some consonants, some of them becoming silent. Now, the reasons for these changes are unknown. There are a number of theories, of course. One theory, the most popular, is based on the idea of population migration. Some scholars have argued that because of the rapid migration of peoples to the southeast of England from the east and central Midlands of England following the Black Death, there was a clash of dialects, and this made Londoners want to distinguish their speech from that of the immigrants who came from other English cities. So they began changing their vowel system. So basically, according to this argument, it was a result of snobbery. The other three reasons have to do with French, but at least a couple of them seem to be contradictory. The first of these French arguments is that there was an influx of French loanwords into English, and this caused a major shift in pronunciation. But others assert that because of the increasing prestige of French pronunciation among the middle classes, perhaps because the English aristocracy had switched from French to English around this time, there was a process of hypercorrection that may have started a shift that unintentionally resulted in vowel pronunciations that are inaccurate imitations of French pronunciations. But somewhat in opposition to this, there's a theory that states that the wars with France and the general anti-French sentiment that was common at the time caused a hypercorrection in the opposite direction, deliberately trying to make English sound less like French. So basically, no one knows. But perhaps more generally, there seems to have been a shift away from continental pronunciations. Note that there was a shift in German vowel usage some years earlier, but with the German vowel shifts, the spellings of the words also changed to match the sound, but this wasn't the case in English, which is why we have so many different pronunciations of the same vowel structures. What are some of the examples of these shifts? Well, consider this word. This shifted from beat to bite. Or this one. This went from mate to meet. Or this one. This went from naam to name. Or this went from hoose to house. And of course you can still hear in some dialects, or at least in exaggerated Scottish accents, for instance, this use of the word hoose to rhyme with moose. It's a bit of a caricature of a Scottish accent, but it may in fact be the way the word house was pronounced. Hoose. This went from boat to boot. This went from bought to boat. You can still hear bought, almost anyway, in some regional accents. Someone in Somerset may say, "Where did you leave your boat?" It's not quite bought, but it's not boat either. Where did you leave your boat? I apologise if I'm not really very good at some of these accents. There were quite a lot of other changes. What are some of them? Well, among the consonants, words like nor and night would originally have been pronounced gnaw and knight. Breath would have been pronounced breath, just as we pronounce breathe. I gave the example earlier of naam shifting to name, but actually it probably would originally have been Name. Name. The final E is pronounced as it is in modern German. So again, maybe this reveals a tendency to shift away from the European pronunciation. Now, Shakespeare was writing his plays in the middle of this vowel change, so his pronunciation was probably a mixture of both sounds. So, for example, we might hear beat rather than bite, and mate rather than meet. And this shift in vowels also explains why some of Shakespeare's rhymes don't always seem to work. In an episode of the series Upstart Crow, a Ben Elton comedy series about Shakespeare, Shakespeare's staff criticised him for trying to rhyme loved with proved. It's a very funny scene, but in fact, they would have rhymed at the time. So in Sonnet 116, for instance, we would read, "If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved." It rhymes perfectly. Why did proved shift to proved, but loved remained as loved? In Sonnet 18, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day," etc., Shakespeare rhymes date with temperate. All the other rhymes in that sonnet work perfectly, so we may surmise that temperate was originally pronounced temperate, so that it actually rhymed with date. The word hour in Shakespeare probably rhymed with more. Note that scholars often work backwards from Shakespeare's rhyming schemes and other forms of wordplay to help reconstruct the original pronunciation in conjunction with other lines of evidence. For example, in a speech by Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet, Mercutio uses the word film, but in some folios this is spelled film. So that's probably how the word film was pronounced. You still hear that sometimes today in Irish English, for example, and I've often heard people from Sydney in particular pronounce this as film. So when we hear Shakespeare's plays in modern pronunciation, we probably miss not only some of the rhyming schemes, but also some of the puns and word plays. So for example, in the prologue to Romeo and Juliet, there's the line, "From forth the fatal loins of these two foes." In the Cornish accent today, the word lines is pronounced loins. It was in Shakespeare's day too, and so was the word loins. Not loins as it is now, but loins. I hope you can hear the difference. As I say, I'm not particularly good at that. I can hear it. So the person hearing that line in Shakespeare's day would have heard, "From forth the fatal loins of these two foes," which could have meant either loins or lines. So this has a double meaning, a pun that's missed in modern English, because loins and lines sound completely different. Perhaps there's also a double entendre here. The word lines, meaning, your line of descent, the word lines may have been completely inoffensive, but perhaps the word loins was a little bit risque. There's a father and son team, David and Ben Crystal, who are both linguists, and they've done a lot of work to reconstruct the original pronunciation of Shakespeare. Go and Google them, David Crystal and Ben Crystal. You can hear them reciting Shakespeare in the original pronunciation. They actually put on in the Globe Theatre in London, sometime in the early 2000s, I think, several performances of Romeo and Juliet in original pronunciation. Whenever I hear this, when I hear them reciting Shakespeare in the original pronunciation, it always sounds to me most like a southwest accent of places like Cornwall and Somerset, but no doubt there are elements of other accents in there too. Now, I don't think hearing Shakespeare in the original pronunciation really makes it any easier, it probably makes it more difficult. But it does help, at least when reading Shakespeare, to know that words that don't appear to rhyme probably did. And it's also fun to find new puns, new word plays and double entendres that would otherwise be overlooked.